I'd always thought my life with Clara was a quiet masterpiece, a canvas painted with steady strokes of trust and routine. We'd been married 12 years, living in a modest house on the edge of a sleepy town, where the biggest scandal was Mrs. Harrow's prize roses going missing. Clara was my anchor, soft-spoken, with hazel eyes that crinkled when she laughed, and a habit of humming old jazz tunes while she cooked. I worked as a mechanic, hands stained with grease, while she taught piano lessons from our living room. Our days were predictable. I'd come home to the scent of her lavender soap and the faint echo of scales being played by some kid with clumsy fingers. We weren't perfect, but we were solid. Or so I believed. It started with the smallest crack. One evening, I came home early. Shop closed for a busted water main, and found her gone. The house was silent, no piano, no humming. Her car wasn't in the drive. I figured she'd run to the store, but her phone went straight to voicemail. Hours passed. By midnight, I was pacing, my boots scuffing the hardwood she'd insisted we refinish last summer. She stumbled in at 2 a.m., cheeks flushed, claiming she'd been at a student's recital that ran late. Her coat smelled faintly of smoke. Not hers, she didn't smoke, and her hair was mussed in a way I hadn't seen since our early days. I asked questions. She brushed them off with a tired smile. "You worry too much, Ben," she said, kissing my forehead. I let it go. Fool that I was, I let it go. The next week it happened again. Then again. Always a recital, a parent meeting, a last-minute errand. I'd sit in the dark, nursing a beer, watching headlights sweep past our street, wondering why her excuses felt like pebbles piling up in my chest. I didn't want to doubt her. Clara wasn't the type. She'd cry over a hurt bird, for God's sake. But the cracks widened. One night, I found a receipt in her purse. Dinner for two at a place we'd never been. Dated a night she'd claimed to be tutoring. I held it in my trembling hands, staring at the numbers, the name. Asterisk La Petite Rose Star. Fancy. Not us. Not her. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed proof, something to shatter the illusion I'd built around us. I needed to see it myself. I became a shadow in my own life, watching her like some pathetic detective in a cheap novel. I'd pretend to leave for work, then circle back, parking down the street to see when she'd slip out. She did too often. Always in her blue dress, the one she'd worn to our 10th anniversary, her hair swept up like she'd put effort into it. She'd drive off and I'd follow, keeping my truck far enough behind so she wouldn't spot me in her rear view. My heart thumped loud enough to drown out the engine's growl. I told myself I was crazy, that this was just Clara being Clara. Maybe she'd joined some secret book club or charity group. But deep down, I knew better. One Tuesday, she led me to a house on the edge of town. A sprawling thing with ivy choking the walls and a red sports car in the drive. Not hers. I parked a block away, binoculars trembling in my hands, and watched her knock. The door opened, and there he was, Daniel Pierce. I knew him. Everyone did. Local real estate hotshot, mid-40s, with a smile too white and a handshake too firm. He'd sold us our house, all charm and slick promises. Clara stepped inside, and the door closed. I sat there for 3 hours, staring at that red car, the curtains drawn tight. When she came out, her lipstick was gone, her dress wrinkled. She drove home, and I followed, bile rising in my throat. That night, she hummed while making dinner, oblivious to the storm brewing in me. I asked how her day was. "Fine," she said, chopping carrots. "Just lessons." Lies spilled from her like water from a faucet, and I swallowed them, choking on the taste. Couldn't sleep. I lay beside her, her breathing soft and even, while my mind spun with images of her and Daniel. His hands on her, her laughter for him. I started digging. His name popped up on her phone bill, calls, texts, late-night whispers. I hacked her email, an old trick from my tech-savvy cousin, and found messages. "Miss you already," he wrote. "Can't wait," she replied. My Clara. My wife. With him. The betrayal wasn't just the act. It was the details. She'd woven him into our life like a thread I hadn't noticed until it unraveled everything. I remembered Daniel at our housewarming, complimenting her pecan pie, lingering too long by the piano. I thought he was just friendly. Now every memory twisted into something ugly. She'd worn that blue dress for him, not me. She'd lied to my face night after night, while I fixed engines and trusted her implicitly. I felt like a fool, a prop in her play, while she danced her duet with him. I confronted her once, obliquely. "You seem distracted lately," I said over breakfast, my voice tight. She froze, fork halfway to her mouth, then smiled. "Just tired, Ben. You know how the kids wear me out. Kids. Lessons. Always the same shield." I nodded, but my hands clenched under the table. I couldn't tip my hand, not yet. I needed more. Something undeniable. Something to fuel the rage simmering in my gut. So I kept watching, kept waiting. I bought a cheap camera, hid it in her car under the passenger seat. It recorded her laughter, her voice soft and warm, talking to him on speakerphone. "You're terrible," she giggled. "I'll be there soon." Terrible. That word stuck in me like a splinter. The footage piled up. Her driving to his place, singing love songs I hadn't heard in years. Her coming home late, brushing past me with excuses. I watched it all in the garage, hunched over my laptop, the glow burning my eyes. Each clip was a knife, carving away the man I'd been. Steady Ben, trusting Ben. In his place grew something darker, something cold. I didn't just want answers anymore. I wanted her to feel what I felt, to lose what I'd lost. I started planning, slow and deliberate, letting the idea take root. Revenge wasn't enough. It had to be cruel, precise, a mirror to her betrayal. I stopped sleeping altogether, my mind a churn of jagged thoughts. Clara didn't notice. She was too wrapped up in her secret world. I'd catch her smiling at her phone, fingers tapping out messages while I sat across from her, invisible. I wondered how long it had been going on. Months? Years? Had she ever loved me? Or was I just the safe harbor she docked in while she dreamed of him? The questions gnawed at me, but the answers didn't matter anymore. What mattered was what came next. I followed Daniel too. He was a creature of habit. Coffee at 8 a.m., gym at noon, office till 6. He lived alone, no wife, no kids. Just that flashy car and a reputation for smooth-talking his way into anything. I'd see him strut around town, shaking hands, flashing that grin, and I'd imagine wiping it off his face. But this wasn't about him, not entirely. Clara had chosen this. She'd opened the door. He was just the man on the other side. My anger burned hottest for her, the woman who'd vowed to stand by me, who'd built this life with me only to hollow it out. I tested her one night. "Let's go out," I said. "Somewhere nice, like La Petite Rose." Her face went pale, just for a second, before she laughed it off. "Too fancy for us, Ben. I'd rather stay in." She didn't know about the receipt, didn't know I was circling her lies like a vulture. I smiled back, playing the part, while my mind churned with plans. I'd need evidence. Something public, something she couldn't deny. I'd need to expose her, strip away her mask, let the world see what she'd done. And then I'd take everything she cared about, piece by piece, until she was left with nothing but the wreckage of her choices. The camera in her car became my lifeline, a window into her deceit. I'd sit in the garage, headphones on, listening to her voice. Light, flirtatious, alive in a way it hadn't been with me for years. She'd talk to Daniel about mundane things, dinner plans, a movie. But it was the intimacy that gutted me. "You make me feel young again," she said once, and I nearly smashed the screen. Young again. As if I'd aged her. As if our life together was a burden she'd escaped. I saved every clip, every word, building a library of her betrayal. It wasn't enough to know. I needed her to face it. I started small, planting seeds. I'd mentioned Daniel casually. Saw him at the gas station today, still driving that red monstrosity. And watch her squirm, her answers clipped. I left the receipt from La Petite Rose on the kitchen counter, folded under a bill, waiting for her to find it. She didn't say a word, but I saw her shove it in the trash later, her hands shaking. She knew I was closing in, but she didn't know how far I'd go. I tracked her to his place again, this time with a drone, borrowed from a buddy at the shop. It hovered over his backyard, catching her lounging by his pool, his arm around her, her head on his shoulder. I had photos now, timestamps, proof. The plan solidified. I'd ruin her, but not with violence. That was too simple, too quick. I'd take her reputation, her comfort, her pride. I'd make her feel the weight of every lie, every stolen moment. I called a friend who worked at the local paper, asked about running an anonymous story. I dug into Daniel's business dealings, rumors of shady loans, unpaid debts. I'd hit them both, but Clara hardest. She'd built this house of cards, and I'd watch it burn, brick by brick, until she begged for the mercy she'd never given me. The garage became my war room, a sanctuary of cold determination. I'd sit there night after night, surrounded by tools and the hum of the fridge, sifting through my growing pile of evidence. Recordings, photos, emails. Clara's voice looped in my head, her laughter for Daniel a splinter I couldn't pull out. I stopped eating much. Food tasted like ash. She'd notice, sometimes, her brow furrowing as she set a plate of roast in front of me. "You okay, Ben?" she'd ask, voice soft with what I now saw as fake concern. I'd nod, force a bite, and say nothing. She didn't deserve my words anymore. I started with Daniel's weak spots. My buddy at the shop, Pete, knew a guy who knew a guy. Small towns are webs like that. Turns out Daniel's real estate empire wasn't as shiny as his car. He'd been dodging taxes, skimming from clients, leaving a trail of IOUs with some rough characters. I didn't care about ruining him outright. He was collateral. But I fed the rumors, dropped hints at the bar, let the whispers spread. Soon, folks were side-eyeing him at the diner, and his phone started ringing with creditors. I watched him sweat from afar, his grin faltering. It wasn't enough, though. Clara was the heart of this, and I needed her to bleed. I tested her again, sharper this time. "Heard Daniel's in some trouble?" I said one morning, casual as I poured coffee. She choked on her toast, eyes darting to me, then away. "Oh, that's too bad," she mumbled, brushing crumbs off her lap. I saw the panic, the way her fingers tightened around her mug. She knew something. Maybe he'd told her. Maybe she felt the walls closing in. Good. I wanted her rattled. That night, I uploaded a clip from the car camera to a burner account online. Her voice, clear as day, giggling about a weekend away with him. I didn't tag her yet. Just let it sit there. A bomb waiting for its fuse. Clara started slipping. She'd forget her lies, mix up her excuses. One night she said she'd been at a recital, but the next day mentioned a parent canceling. Same time, same evening. I didn't call her out. I just filed it away, another brick for the wall I was building around her. She'd glance at me sometimes, searching my face like she sensed the shift, but I kept it blank. I'd learned to hide the storm inside me, to smile while my hands itched to tear her world apart. She didn't know I'd seen her with him, didn't know I had proof stacking up like firewood for a bonfire. I took it further. I printed the drone photos, her by his pool, his arm slung around her, and mailed them to her mother anonymously. Clara adored her mom, a prim widow who'd clutch her pearls at anything less than perfection. The call came 2 days later. I answered, heard the shrill panic in her mom's voice. "Ben, what's going on? I got these awful pictures." I played dumb, handed the phone to Clara, watched her face drain of color. She stammered through excuses. Photoshop, a misunderstanding, while I sipped my beer, silent. Her mom didn't buy it. I could tell from the clipped goodbye. Clara turned to me after, eyes wet. "You believe me, right?" I shrugged. "Sure." The lie tasted bitter, but it kept her off balance. Online, the clip was gaining traction. Locals started whispering. Asterisk, is that Clara? Sounds like her. Asterisk, I fueled it, posting more snippets, all anonymous, all damning. Her piano students dwindled. Parents canceled lessons with vague apologies. She'd sit at the bench, staring at the keys, her humming gone. I felt no pity. She'd chosen this, traded our life for stolen moments. Now she'd pay. I contacted my friend at the paper, gave him the story. Unfaithful wife, shady lover, small-town scandal. He ate it up, promised a front-page spread. The fuse was lit. The article hit like a sledgehammer. Local teacher's secret life exposed. It screamed. Alongside grainy stills from the drone. Clara and Daniel, unmistakable. My name stayed out of it. I'd insisted on that. I wanted her to think the world had turned on her, not me. She found the paper on our porch that morning, unfolded it with trembling hands, and let out a sound I'd never heard. A choked, animal wail. She stumbled inside, clutching it, staring at me like I could fix it. "Ben, how did this happen?" she whispered. I shrugged, stirring my coffee. "Guess people talk." She unraveled fast. The phone rang off the hook. Her mom, friends, the few students she had left. She'd answer, voice cracking, spinning lies that crumbled mid-sentence. I listened from the hall, feeling the first twinge of satisfaction. Her perfect little life was ash now, scattered by her own hands. Daniel called too. I saw his name flash on her screen. She didn't pick up. I wondered if he'd dumped her, if the heat was too much for his polished ego. Didn't matter. He was a footnote. This was about her. I kept pushing. I'd saved her emails, the flirty ones, and forwarded them to the school board from another burner account. Concerned citizen. I signed it. They suspended her pending review, conflict of interest, moral conduct, whatever they called it. She came home that day, eyes red, and collapsed on the couch. "They think I'm a liar," she sobbed. I sat across from her, silent, letting her words hang. She didn't know I'd orchestrated it. Didn't know I turned her own tools against her. That night, I heard her crying in the bathroom, muffled through the door. I didn't knock. I didn't care. She'd built this cage. I was just locking the bars. Clara stopped leaving the house. The curtains stayed drawn, the piano silent. She'd shuffle around in her robe, hair unwashed, a ghost of the woman I'd married. I'd catch her staring out the window, flinching at every car that slowed by. The town had turned on her. Gossip at the grocery store, glares at the post office. She'd lost her students, her job, her dignity, all in weeks. I watched it happen, detached, like observing a storm from a bunker. She'd try to talk to me, voice small. "Ben, we need to figure this out." I'd nod, say nothing. There was nothing to figure out. She'd broken us. I was breaking her back. I didn't stop. I found her old diary. Hidden in a box under the bed, pages filled with her neat script, and scanned the recent entries. She'd written about him, gushing like a teenager. Asterisk Daniel understands me. Ben's so distant. Asterisk distant. That cut deep, but I used it. I photocopied those pages, mailed them to her closest friends, let them see her heart laid bare. The calls stopped after that. She'd lost them too. One night, she confronted me, holding the diary, tears streaking her face. "Did you do this?" she demanded. I met her eyes, calm. "Why would I?" She backed off, doubt flickering. She couldn't prove it, and that was the beauty. She'd never be sure. Daniel's life was crumbling too. Creditors at his door, clients gone. I heard he'd put the house up for sale, that red car vanishing from the drive. I didn't care. My focus was her. I started packing, small things, tools, clothes, moving them to the garage. She noticed, asked where I was going. "Nowhere," I said. "Just organizing." But she knew. The air between us was thick with unspoken endings. I wanted her to feel it, the slow bleed of everything she'd taken for granted. I wasn't done yet. The final blow was coming. Something she'd never see. Something that'd leave her hollow long after I was gone. I let her stew in the wreckage a while longer, watching her shrink into herself. She'd stopped crying, stopped asking questions. She'd just sit there, staring at the walls, a shell I barely recognized. The town had moved on to fresher gossip, but her ruin stuck. She was the cautionary tale now, the woman who'd thrown it all away. I'd stripped her of everything. Her job, her friends, her pride. But it wasn't enough. The betrayal still burned, a coal in my chest, and I needed her to feel it too. Not just the consequences, but the weight of what she'd done to me. I planned the last act with care. She'd always loved that piano. Her refuge, her identity. I'd watched her play for hours, fingers dancing over the keys, lost in some melody I'd never understand. It was hers, bought with her first year's savings. A symbol of the life she'd built before me. And after me, with him. I waited till she was out. Some rare errand, her first in days, and took a sledgehammer from the garage. I didn't smash it outright. Too loud. Too crude. Instead, I pried it apart, piece by piece. Keys loosened, strings cut, wood splintered. I left it gutted, a skeleton on its stand, then dragged the remains to the backyard and doused it with kerosene. When she came home, I was waiting, the match already struck. She saw the smoke first, then the pile, and screamed, a raw, guttural sound that echoed through the trees. "What did you do?" she shrieked, rushing outside. I stood there, calm, watching the flames lick up the wreckage. "You didn't need it anymore," I said. She fell to her knees, hands clawing at the grass, sobbing like I'd torn out her soul. Maybe I had. She looked up at me, eyes wild, and for the first time I saw fear. Not regret, not love, fear. "Why?" she whispered. I didn't answer. I just watched the fire burn, the heat prickling my skin, and felt the coal in my chest finally cool. This was it, the end of her, the end of us. The fire died down, leaving a heap of charred wood and twisted metal where her piano once stood. Clara stayed on her knees, staring at the ashes, her sobs fading into a hollow silence. I didn't move, didn't speak. The air smelled of smoke and ruin, and for the first time in months, I felt a strange calm settle over me. She'd lost everything now. Her lover, her reputation, her music. I'd taken it all, piece by piece, and she'd watched it slip away without ever seeing my hand behind it. That was the beauty of it. She'd never know for sure. She stood eventually, shaky, her face streaked with dirt and tears. "You're a monster," she whispered, voice raw. I met her gaze, unflinching. "Maybe," I said, "but you made me one." She flinched like I'd struck her, and for a moment I thought she'd fight back, yell, accuse, something. But she just turned and stumbled inside, the door slamming behind her. I stayed out there, watching the last embers glow, letting the weight of what I'd done sink in. It wasn't joy I felt, not exactly. It was closure, cold and sharp, like a blade sliding into its sheath. That night, she didn't come to bed. I found her on the couch the next morning, curled up with a blanket, eyes glassy. She didn't look at me, didn't speak. I made coffee, went about my day, work, home, routine, like nothing had changed. But everything had. The house felt empty, not just of sound, but of her. She was a ghost now, haunting the life she'd betrayed. I didn't care. I'd already started moving out in my head, plotting the final steps. The piano was just the beginning. I wanted her to feel me leave, to know what it was like to be abandoned the way she'd abandoned me. I didn't rush it. Revenge like this needed time, needed to simmer. I kept living there, sharing the space with her silence, letting it fester. She'd try to talk sometimes, small things, "We're out of milk," or "The faucet's leaking." But I'd just nod, keep my distance. She didn't deserve conversation, didn't deserve the comfort of normalcy. I packed more of my things, slow and deliberate, stacking boxes in the garage. She'd see them, ask what I was doing. "Just cleaning," I'd say, and she'd drop it, too broken to push. I sold the house out from under her. It was in my name, old-fashioned, sure, but she'd never cared about paperwork. I called Daniel's old firm, found a buyer through a different agent, kept it quiet. The offer came fast, cash, above asking. I signed the papers at work, didn't tell her a thing. She'd find out when it was done, when the new owners showed up with their keys. I imagined her face, the shock, the realization that even the walls she hid behind were gone. It wasn't about the money. I didn't need much. It was about pulling the last rug from under her feet. I left her one last gift. In the kitchen, I taped a USB drive to the counter, labeled simply Clara. It held everything: car recordings, drone footage, emails, diary scans. All the proof she'd never seen, all the threads I'd pulled to unravel her life. I didn't write a note. She'd know what it was when she played it, know who'd orchestrated her fall. I wanted her to sit with that, to replay her own words, her own choices, until they echoed in her skull like a prison sentence. By then, I'd be gone, the house sold, my truck packed with what little I cared to keep. The day I left, she was in the living room, staring at that USB drive like it might bite her. I'd set it there that morning, watched her find it, watched her hesitate. She didn't plug it in. Not yet. But I knew she would. I grabbed my last box, my jacket, my keys, and walked out without a word. She didn't follow, didn't call after me. The silence was deafening, heavier than any fight we'd ever had. I drove to a motel on the edge of town, checked in, and sat on the lumpy bed, staring at the wall. It was done. Almost. The new owners took possession 2 days later. I heard about it from Pete, who'd seen the moving truck roll in. Clara had been there, apparently, standing on the porch as they arrived, confused, then frantic. They'd shown her the deed, told her to leave. She'd called my phone. First time in weeks, but I didn't answer. Let her figure it out. Let her scramble. I pictured her packing her clothes, her trinkets, nowhere to go. Her mom wouldn't take her, not after the photos. Her friends were gone. Daniel was a memory. She was alone, just like I'd been, staring into the void she'd made. I kept tabs, discreetly. She ended up in a cheap apartment across town. One of those gray buildings with peeling paint and buzzing lights. No piano, no students, no life. She'd lost her teaching license after the board's review. Public scandal. Unfit character. I didn't feel sorry for her. I didn't feel much at all, just a dull hum where the rage used to be. The USB drive was the final nail. I knew she'd watched it by now, seen the scope of her betrayal mirrored back. I wondered if she hated me or herself or both. Didn't matter. She'd carry it either way. Weeks passed, then months. I moved an hour away, took a job at a new shop, started over. The town forgot me. Small mercy. But Clara lingered in their stories, a cautionary tale traded over coffee. I'd hear bits through Pete. She'd been seen at the grocery store, thin and quiet, eyes down. She'd applied for jobs, clerical stuff, nothing with music, but no one hired her. Too much baggage. I didn't seek her out, didn't need to. The damage was done, permanent, a scar she'd wear forever. That was enough. I rebuilt, slow but steady. New apartment, new routines. I'd sit on my balcony at night, beer in hand, listening to the quiet. No piano, no humming, just me. The coal in my chest was gone, replaced by something lighter. Not peace, not yet, but close. I didn't think about her much, didn't need to. She was a chapter I'd closed, a book I'd burned. But one day, a letter came, her handwriting, shaky on the envelope. I didn't open it right away. Let it sit on the table. A ghost I wasn't sure I wanted to face. When I did, it was short. "I'm sorry," she wrote. "I know what I did. I know what you did. I don't blame you." That was it. No please, no excuses, just those lines. I read it twice, then tore it up, let the pieces scatter in the wind. Sorry didn't change anything. It didn't rebuild trust, didn't erase her laughter with him. It was hers to carry, not mine. I'd shed that weight when I'd walked away, when I'd watched her piano burn. She'd live with it. Alone, broken, a shadow of herself. That was my revenge, cruel and complete. A year later, I saw her by chance. I was passing through town, picking up parts for the shop, when I spotted her outside a diner. She was thinner, hair graying at the roots, carrying a bag of takeout. She didn't see me, didn't look up, just shuffled to her car, a beat-up sedan that wasn't hers before. I watched her drive off, and it hit me. She was nothing now. Not my wife, not a teacher, not even a memory I cared to keep. I'd taken it all, stripped her bare, left her to rot in the mess she'd made. And I was free. I drove home that night, the road stretching dark and endless ahead. The past was a speck in my rear view, shrinking with every mile. Clara would live, breathe, eat, sleep, but she'd never live again, not the way she had. Not with joy, not with purpose. I'd made sure of that. The house was gone. The piano ash. Her world a pile of rubble I'd walked away from. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I just drove, the hum of the engine my only company, knowing I'd won. Not with fists or shouts, but with patience, with precision, with a cruelty she'd taught me. She'd betrayed me once. I'd betrayed her back 1,000 times over, and she'd feel it every day until the end.